This is You've Already Been Hacked, recorded on 20 February 2021. We're starting off with, yet again, more SolarWinds. And then we have a follow-up, and then we'll get to some of the new stuff. So, SolarWinds. Excuse me. Microsoft announced this past week that SolarWinds hackers gained access to source code from a limited number of Azure, Intune, and Exchange components. This announcement is Microsoft's final update into their investigation and states that they determined that hackers could only access a few files for most repositories. However, some other repositories, including ones for Azure, Intune, and Exchange, the attackers were able to download component source code. Quote, for a small number of repositories, there was additional access, including some cases downloading component source code. These repositories contained code for a small subset of Azure components, subsets of service security and identity, a small subset of Intune components, and a small subset of Exchange components. Based on the search keywords used when the attackers searched for secrets, such as API keys, credentials, and security tokens that may have been embedded in the source code. These credentials would have potentially allowed threat actors to gain further access to Microsoft's systems if found. Microsoft states that they have a strict development policy that prohibits storing secrets in source code and used automated tools to verify this compliance, and stated what was accessed did not contain credentials. At the federal level, the White House has a message for America related to SolarWinds, and that message is, it's going to take a long time to sort through the fallout from the massive espionage operation spurred on by the SolarWinds breach. The recently installed Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Technology, Ann Neuberger, stressed during a White House briefing this past week that the way the suspected Russian hackers infiltrated a SolarWinds network management software update with malicious code has made it more difficult for federal investigators to track down the details of the compromise. To date, 9 federal agencies and approximately 100 private sector entities have been compromised, according to Neuberger's statement. The list of victims is only likely to grow, Neuberger warned, as the U.S. government continues to assess the full impact. Investigators will likely be uncovering other follow-up intrusions that stem from or are likely linked to the SolarWinds breach. Private sector assessments of the breach in recent months have deemed the hackers were careful to mask their work from victims' view to make sure any eventual removal and remediation efforts were even more difficult. In the briefing, Neuberger noted that hackers specifically focused on the identity part of the network, which is the hardest to clean up. The briefing also stressed that the information security community should not be thinking about this operation as an isolated espionage incident, indicating that the United States is on alert for potentially more disruptive activities. While the hackers infiltrated a number of entities via the SolarWinds hack, a Reuters investigation also revealed that suspected Chinese hackers have leveraged a SolarWinds software flaw alongside the Russians to target a federal payroll entity. Part of the complexity of understanding the depths of this breach is that hackers appear to have worked to conceal their activities from U.S. intelligence community members while working from within the United States. A quote from Neuberger is, "There's a lack of domestic visibility. As a country, we have chosen to have both privacy and security. The intelligence community largely has no visibility into private sector networks inside the United States." The hackers launched the hack from within the United States, which further made it difficult for U.S. government entities to observe their activity. And the reason for this, as Neuberger states out, is by charter and by law, U.S. intelligence community members have no jurisdiction inside the United States. Only very certain specific agencies or bureaus have the ability to look at U.S. data, and that is via court orders or warrants. Neuberger indicated that current authorities and culture around breaches in the federal government will need to change to improve the way the federal government responds to breaches like this one, adding that the Biden administration is still considering possible responses to the breach. Russia has denied being involved in the operation. All right, moving on. Let's talk a little follow-up from the water treatment plant in Florida that was recently hacked. Researchers at Cyber News say they have found 11 credentials paired and linked to the Oldsmar water plant in a 2017 compilation of stolen breach credentials. Meanwhile, they also found 13 credentials paired in the more recent compilation of many breaches, or the COMB for short, that occurred just days before the attack. This collection was leaked on the Raid Forum's English language cybercrime community forum on February 2nd and contains a staggering 3.27 billion unique combinations of clear text email addresses and passwords in an aggregated database. It's important to note, though, that officials have not publicly drawn any connection between the credentials discovered in the leaked breach database and the attack that occurred last week. Quote, all computers used by the water plant personnel were connected to the SCADA system and used the 32-bit version of Windows 7. Further, all computers shared the same password for remote access and appeared to be connected directly to the internet without any type of firewall protection installed. Researchers also claim the attackers may have used the credentials acquired from either the 2017 breach compilation or the COMB in the hack. However, given the close date of the COMB leak to the attack, it's more likely that it was this database that the attackers found the credentials used in the system breach. A quote from Meyer, one of the researchers, is, regarding the credentials for the Florida water system supply attack, we could not confirm whether they were admin or team viewer for legal and ethical reasons. Meaning that the researchers most likely had credentials that they could have used, but didn't actually make the attempt because that would have, been bad form. Mantis Sanusagassis, excuse me if I've mispronounced his name, senior information security researcher at Cyber News, told the press, quote, we just pointed to the fact that there were some type of plant credentials in the leaked database, unquote. An attack that happened a little while back was against software created by Acelion, and the software was called the File Transfer Appliance. Well, 2 more organizations have been affected by that particular breach. Singtel says it is investigating the impact of a cybersecurity breach that may have compromised customer data after it ascertained on the 9th of February that, quote, files were taken, unquote. The attack had affected a file sharing system developed 20 years ago by Acelion, which the Singapore Teleco had used internally and with external stakeholders. Singtel revealed in that statement it was notified by Acelion that the file sharing system, called FTA, had been breached by unidentified hackers. The telco said the tool was deployed as a standalone system and used to share information within the organization and with external stakeholders. All use of the system had been pulled back by relevant authorities, including Singapore's Cybersecurity Agency and local police. Singtel added that it currently was assessing the nature of the impact of the breach and the extent of the data that might have been illegally accessed. Singtel says that the incident was isolated since it involved a standalone third-party system, and stated that its core operations were not affected. In a FAQ posted online, Singtel said it was reviewing its processes and file sharing protocols to, quote, further enhance our information security posture, unquote. On February 1st, Acelion stated that its FTA system was 20 years old and nearing its end of life cycle. It had been the target of a sophisticated cyber attack, which was first made known on the 23rd of December, when Acelion informed all of its customers of an attack involving FTA. Acelion stated it was made aware of a zero-day vulnerability in mid-December, which was then the beginning of a concerted cyber attack that continued into January 2021, with further exploits identified. Acelion also stated it had released a fix for the initial exploit within 72 hours and continued to release patches close to each vulnerability discovered in the following weeks. Fewer than 50 customers were affected by the incident, according to Acelion, noting that it had added monitoring and alerting tools to identify anomalies associated with these attack vectors. The company also stated the vulnerabilities were limited to the FTA software and did not impact enterprise content firewall products such as Kiteworks, on which most Acelion customers are currently operated. Kiteworks was developed on a different code base and security architecture, according to the company. However, with that said, one of those 50 that were impacted looks to be in the United States. Washington State looks like it's going to pass a bill that would centralize the government's cybersecurity efforts. Lawmakers in Washington State are pursuing legislation that would centralize the state government's cybersecurity operations into a single office. The legislation, which Governor Jay Inslee supports, was prompted by the February 1st disclosure of a data breach by one of the offices of the Washington State Auditor software vendors. That vendor? Acelion. The impact of the breach in Washington State affects more than 1.6 million people, including individuals who filed for unemployment benefits in 2020, state workers, state and local government agencies, and people served by the State Department of Children, Youth, and Families. While the full impact of that particular breach is still being worked out, it has quickly led to a reconsideration of the state's cybersecurity organization. The governor called for an overhaul of the existing Office of Cybersecurity, which would take it from a division that advises a string of federal agencies on best practices to one that oversees IT security across the entirety of the Washington state government. During a state Senate hearing this past week, Washington Chief Information Officer Jim Weaver, who leads Washington's Technology Solutions, the cybersecurity office's parent agency, lent his support to the bill, saying it would, quote, solidify the state's cybersecurity practices. While much of the bill's language formalizes many existing aspects of the Office of Cybersecurity, it assigns numerous duties to the Chief Information Security Officer, a role currently held by Vinod Brahmpuram. Again, I apologize for the mispronunciation. Related to the continuity of government operations in the event of a major cyber attack. The CISO would be responsible for setting government-wide standards, which agencies would be required to follow, including annual compliance certifications. Agencies would also undergo independent IT audits at least once every 3 years. The Office of Cybersecurity would have until July 2022 to develop a full catalog of enterprise services and products it makes available to agencies. Additionally, the bill would make the state CISO the chief point of contact for local governments seeking cybersecurity support from the state. Servers belonging to the Dutch Research Council, NWO, have been compromised, forcing the organization to make its network unavailable and suspended subsidy allocations for the foreseeable future. The NWO is tasked with investing in research and research infrastructure to increase quality and innovation in science. For this purpose, it is a significant entity in the Netherlands that makes annual investments of close to 1 billion euros. It funds thousands of researchers at universities and institutes in the country, driving quality and innovation in science. A press release this past week that conveys a minimum of details about the attack states the organization had its servers hacked and that its network is not accessible. There is no time frame for restoring the systems, but the organization stated it is channeling its efforts to solve the issues as fast as possible. With its network down, NWO applications remain unavailable. This includes the organization's email service and the online resources from 2 entities under NWO, the Netherlands Institute for Educational Research, NRO, and the National Governing Body for Practice-Oriented Research, SIA. NWO says for its part that its website was not impacted by the attack. The external server hosting the ISAC application and reporting system used by applicants to submit their proposals also appears to have not been infected. However, the ISAC server has been shut down until the incident assessments remove all suspicion of the possibility of a malware infection. As a result, the processes of SIA and NRO remain suspended indefinitely. NWO has also stated that it will provide no further details about the attack and how it occurred while the investigation and system restoration work is underway. NWO is the second public body tasked with investing in science and research that has been hit by a cyber attack in less than a month. The other one, in late January, was the UK Research and Innovation Agency, or the UKRI, and it announced that it had suffered a ransomware attack that encrypted data and affected 2 of its services. Just like NWO, UKUR also handled large funds. The Financial Information Sharing and Analysis Server, FS-ISAC, has stated that threat actors are hitting organizations that it has as members with DDoS ransomware attacks. More than 100 financial service firms across multiple countries were targeted in a wave of ransomware, distributed denial of service attacks that conducted by the same threat actor throughout 2020. The attacks moved in methodical fashion across Europe, North America, Latin America, and Asia, hitting dozens of organizations in the financial sector in each region, according to FS-ISAC this past week. Among those targeted were banks, exchanges, payment companies, card issuers, payroll companies, insurance firms, and money transfer services. In each instance, the attacker sent targets an extortion note that threatened to disrupt their websites and services with a DDoS attack if the demanded ransom was not paid. In a statement this week, the FS-ISAC stated that the threat's impact was largely mitigated by the willingness of members to share information about the unfolding threat as it happened via the Threat Intelligence Exchange at the ISAC. No FS-ISAC member that received the threat reported paying the ransom, the Information Sharing Center said in an emailed statement, quote, "As we expect these globalized attack waves to evolve and grow in sophistication, cross-border intelligence sharing will become even more critical in cyber defense," unquote. The FS-ISAC's analysis of ransom DDoS attacks showed a plurality of targeted organizations. 43% were based in either the United States or Canada, 38% of the attacks hit banks, credit card issuers, and other financial companies across Europe, the UK, Middle East, and Africa. The Asian Pacific region accounted for 15%, and 3% of targeted organizations were in Latin America. Further, a breakdown of victims by subvertical revealed the attacks were primarily focused on retail banking or consumer banking. More than 40% of DDoS extortion attacks hit these organizations. Others that were relatively heavily targeted included exchanges at 15%, payment companies at 13%, and security and investment firms at 10%. Have you recently purchased one of those newfangled M1 Mac computers? Well, get ready. Mac malware has always been less common than its Windows targeting counterparts, but in recent years, the threat to Apple computer has gone mainstream. There's adware and even ransomware tailored to Macs, and the attackers are always looking for ways to circumvent Apple's latest defenses. Now, hackers have debuted malware tailored to run on Apple's new ARM-based M1 processors, released for the current MacBook Pro, Air, and Mac Mini this past November. Apple's M1 chip is a departure from Intel's x86 architecture, and Apple has used that since 2005. It gives Apple the opportunity to bake specific Mac security protections and features directly into its processors, and that transition has required legitimate developers to work on building versions of their software that run natively on the new M1 architecture for optimal performance, rather than needing to be translated through Apple's emulation layer called Rosetta 2. Not to be outdone, malware authors have started making these transitions too. Longtime Mac security researcher Pat Wardell published findings this past week about Safari's adware extension that was originally written to run on Intel x86 chips but now has been redeveloped specifically for the M1. The malicious extension GoSearch22 is a member of the notorious PRIT Macware adware family. The adware sample Wardell found takes a standard tactic of posing as a legitimate Safari browser extension and then collecting user data and serving illicit ads like banners and pop-ups, including those that link to other malicious sites. Apple declined to comment further about this finding, and Wardell says that the adware was signed with an Apple Developer ID, a paid account that allows Apple to keep track of all Mac and iOS developers. The company has since revoked the GoSearch22 certificate. The malicious software extension for Safari does have some anti-analysis features, including logic to try to avoid debugging tools. But according to Wardell, that while VirusTotal's suite of antivirus scanners easily spot the x86-based version of the adware as malicious, there was a 15% drop in detection in the M1 version. According to Red Canary researchers, there's often a lag in detection rates as antivirus and other monitoring tools gather signatures or digital fingerprints for new types of malware. Quote, watching malware make the transition from Intel to M1 rapidly is concerning because security tools aren't ready to deal with it, unquote. For now, the native M1 malware that researchers have found doesn't seem to be a desperately dangerous threat in itself. But the emergence of these new strains is a warning that there may be more to come, and that detection tools need to bridge the gap and be ready, and soon. And finally, 3 suspected North Korean military intelligence hackers have been charged with, among other things, conspiring to loot more than $1.3 billion from banks, ATMs, and cryptocurrency companies, according to an indictment unsealed by the U.S. Department of Justice this past week. Court documents filed in the District Court in Los Angeles in December last year are now made public, and they claim that 3 individuals were hackers employed by the Reconnaissance General Bureau, or the RGB, a North Korean intelligence agency. The 3 men have been charged with a long list of wrongdoing, including the hacking of Sony in 2014 for its film, The Interview, that depicted a fictional assassination of the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. More financially rewarding was their alleged hand in creating the WannaCry ransomware in 2017 that attacked the UK's national health system and hit businesses from the automotive to banking industries. The indictment also claimed the suspected Pyongyang cyber spies pilfered and extorted as much as $1.2 billion from banks in Vietnam, Bangladesh, Taiwan, Mexico, Malta, and Africa between 2015 and 2019 by hacking into their computer networks. The men, it also claims, siphoned $6.1 million from ATMs in Pakistan, targeted digital currency exchanges and trading platforms to pinch $111.7 million, and even went as far as inventing their own blockchain and cryptocurrency to enrich the North Korean regime. A total of $1.9 million worth of various alleged stolen cryptocurrencies were seized by the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office and will be returned to 2 companies in New York. On top of hacking for money, the North Koreans carried out multiple phishing attacks to steal sensitive data from U.S. government contractors and agencies, such as the Department of State and the Department of Defense. The trio have been charged with 1 count of conspiracy to commit computer fraud and abuse and 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and bank fraud, which carry a maximum sentence of 5 years and 30 years in prison, respectively, if convicted. However, it is unlikely they will ever stand trial in the United States. If you like this podcast, share it with your colleagues and friends. Your support is how we are able to continue to grow and provide this content. Thank you. That's all for the news this week. I'm your professor of cyber risk. We'll talk again soon.